Hi, this is Sam Proctor with the USC Service Department, and today we will be talking about how to configure a bin site on uTreat version 3.06.05. So the first thing I'm going to show you here is the site layout that we will be using for this example. So this one's somewhat complicated. We have quite a few conveyors that we'll have to configure. We have 2 underbins, a transition conveyor, a scale fill conveyor, and a transfer conveyor with a box dump. So quite a few things there. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and get the panels all booted up, which brings you to the main splash screen. And from here we can go ahead and just click anywhere, and it's going to take you to the main treater screen. So when you first are commissioning the site, the automation is only going to be set up for an automated treater, and so you actually have to go in and enable the bin site, tell them what kind of bin site it is, whether it's batch hopper, tri-flo way system, and then configure all the conveyors. So if we look back at this picture again, you can see here that we have a tri-flo, 3 pumps back here. So go back to the automation, and we're going to go to Utilities, Security, click on Username. The name is going to be Admin, A-D-M-I-N, and your password is going to be Service. And then we hit the padlock button, changes your current user to admin, and then hit the blue back arrow. So to enable the bin site, that is under Setup and Options down here in the bottom right. And then we're going to go to Bin Site Settings, and here's our bin site option. So go ahead and enable that, select a tri-flo, and select tri-flo servo. If it was a way hopper, we have the option of a way hopper here, and then we can tell the system whether or not it has the magnetic sensors. Anything USC hopper, batch hopper wise, it will have the magnetic sensors. If you're using somebody else's hopper with the system, like if the customer has a Meridian hopper already existing, they will not have it, so we would have to have this disabled. We also have the option right here for this alternate bin site option, which is basically if we were to try to control another company's bin site panel with our automation. So if somebody has like a KSI bin site and we are going to control it, then we would have to have that selected as well, but we don't have that in this situation. So we're going to go ahead and exit out of here, and then we're going to go to treater settings. For this example, we're just going to leave it as an LPX 2000. If they had an LPV, we can select that up here, enable the loss and weight option if they have it, and enable the drum tilt option. But for this example, we're just going to use an LPX. So go ahead and exit out of there, and then we can exit. And the next thing we are going to do is we are going to set up our conveyors. So that's going to be under Tools and Options, and then Conveyor Editing. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to set up our conveyors, and that is going to be under Tools and Options, and then Conveyor Editing. So in here is where we're going to set up all the conveyors that we have for this site, which is, like I said, if we look back here on this, we're going to have a scale fill conveyor, transfer, transition, underbin 1 forward, underbin 2 forward, and then we're also going to have underbin 1 reverse and underbin 2 reverse. And those are all the conveyors that are controlled by the bin site part of the automation. So that's what we're working on here. So conveyor 1. Conveyor 1 is always your scale fill conveyor. Basically what we do is we start with the way system and we just work our way back to cover all the conveyors. So scale fill is always the first conveyor. So we can click up here and we can name it. We can enable it. We have to have scale fill conveyor check marked. And then we're going to look about getting the inputs and outputs for the conveyor. Where we look at for this is the bin site schematic. Have that pulled up here. So on the bin site schematic, you have to flip through a few pages. This is actually page 14 of the schematic, which is where our input card is for these conveyors. So, and I'm just going to kind of show you how to basically figure out what your inputs are. So with this one, we have the top two. The top left is always your emergency stop. Top right is always your surge suppressor failed. And then from there, you can count the next 8 inputs, which will give you the inputs for each one of the conveyors. So we start in the top, or up here in the top left, and you just count from left to right and go down the card. So under bin 1, conveyor running is number 1. Under bin conveyor number 2 running is 2. Scale fill is 3. Transfer is 4. Transition is 5. And then we have 3 spares for 6, 7, and 8. So the one we're looking for is the scale fill. So, and that one is right here, and our input for that would be 3. Okay, now we need to find the output. So again, we are going to find that on the schematic. You actually have to go down a couple pages, or the first output card is actually right below the input card, down below here. So if I just scroll down a little bit down the schematic, now we have our output card. The output card you count a little differently, because basically this card acts as a relay. So you have constant power coming into the left side of the card, and it stops. Once the output is fired, it allows voltage to cross through and out to the motor starter to engage that conveyor. So we are looking for the scale fill conveyor. So since we only have the outputs on the right hand side, we just count from top to bottom, and there's only 4 outputs per output card. So we have start under bin number 1 forward, start under bin number 1 reverse, and then we have start scale fill. So our output is also going to be 3. And then once we're done here, we can go ahead and save it. So I'm just going to kind of briefly explain what these other checkboxes are for. Down below here we have the conveyor interlocks. What we're doing with that is we are interlocking a conveyor with whatever conveyor is in front of it, so whatever conveyor it's dumping into. Since the scale fill is the one that is first and it's dumping straight into the scale, we don't actually interlock it with anything, but we will interlock conveyors with it and with other conveyors. We also have the reverse option, which we only select when we're dealing with the reversing part of the underbin conveyor. Feedback bypass, if we had something in those outputs and inputs that we were going to control, but we weren't looking for the input, we were just sending out an output to control something, we can select this feedback bypass, which basically tells the system to not look for any inputs back. Bulk seat outlet would be in a situation where we had an outlet conveyor that would normally be plugged into the treater, but in this situation would be controlled by the bin side of the automation, so we would need to select that there. And then the treater inlet with procs would be an inlet conveyor with a proc sensor that would normally be plugged into the treater, but is controlled by the bin side of the automation. And then down below here, this pair, basically what the pair does is it will interlock two components to where if one is running, the other one can't be. So usually about the only time we use this is interlocking the forward option with the reverse option on the underbin. So that way if you're running the conveyor forward, you can't run the conveyor in reverse while it's doing that. So, okay, so now we're just going to move on down the list. If we look back at our picture, the next conveyor I'm going to do is the underbin 1 conveyor, which dumps directly into the hopper of the scale fill conveyor. So we're going to click on conveyor 2, and we're going to go ahead and name this. And then we're going to enable it. And we just need to find our inputs and outputs. Click back on the schematic, scroll up to our inputs. Underbin conveyor number 1 running is input 1. So we'll come back to the program, type in 1 as the input, and click back on the schematic. And now we need to find the output. So scroll back down to the output card. And start underbin conveyor number 1 forward is number 1. So back over here, and our output is also going to be a 1. Now, since this conveyor dumps into the scale fill, and scale fill conveyor was conveyor 1, we're going to check mark C1. So in this conveyor interlocks, the C numbers correlate to the order of the conveyors that are saved off to the left. So conveyor 1 is saved as the scale fill conveyor now, so we need to check C1, so that way the automation knows that the underbin conveyor dumps into the scale fill. So if the scale fill ever stops or pauses or anything like that, it will know to shut off the underbin conveyor as well. So go ahead and save that. And then we're just going to keep working our way down. So now I think I'm going to go ahead and do this transfer conveyor for the for dumping boxes. So click on conveyor 3. We're going to name this transfer conveyor. We're going to enable it. This conveyor also dumps into directly into the scale fill. So we also need to check C1. And then we just need to find our inputs and outputs. Okay. So right here's our transfer conveyor. We count over 1, 2, 3, 4. So our input is 4. And let's find our output. Transfer conveyor is right there. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So our input is 4. And our output is 4. And then we'll just save that. The next conveyor I'm going to do is this transition conveyor. So select conveyor 4, name it transition. We're going to enable it. If we look back at the site layout, this conveyor also dumps into the scale fill conveyor. So we need to check C1 and then just find our inputs and outputs. Okay, so our input is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if we scroll down here, we can see that the transition conveyor is not on this first output card, but there is another one further down the schematic. So if we keep scrolling, we have the outputs for the way hopper and diverter gate if they're there, plus the bin slide gates. So we just need to scroll down a little bit further, and here we have our second output card. So it just continues on, so the first 4 are on the last card, and you just continue counting from there. So 1 through 4 was there, so this is going to be 5 through 8. So 5, 6, 7, and there's our transition conveyor. So our input is 5, our output is 7. And then save that as well. Okay, next we have the second underbin here. So conveyor 5, and we will name this underbin conveyor 2. We are going to enable it. Now with this one, if we look back at our picture, this one is dumping into the transition conveyor. If we go back to the program, so we need to interlock it with the transition conveyor, and if we count down, conveyor 1, conveyor 2, 3, 4, we need to interlock the underbin conveyor 2 with conveyor 4. So under conveyor interlocks, we're going to select 4, and then go back to our schematic and find our inputs and outputs. So our input 1, 2, and the output is 1, or I'm sorry, is 5, because you have the first 4 up top, and then 5, 6, 7, 8, so 5. And then save. So now we have 2 more left to do. We have the reverse options for underbin 1 and underbin 2. So that is going to be what conveyor 6 and 7 are. So we're going to go ahead and start with underbin conveyor 1 reverse. So we'll select conveyor 6. Go ahead and rename that. We will enable it. And then we will go ahead and check back on our schematic. And so with the reverse options, they actually use the same input because it's the same input coming back from the motor starter saying that the motor starter has engaged, but it's the PLC is actually sending different outputs to that motor starter to fire the motor one way or the other. So we're going to use the same input as conveyor number 1 running, just 1, and then for the output, scroll down to first output card, and here's the reverse for conveyor 1, so 1, 2. So we have a input is 1, output is 2. And then we're also going to use the pair with this. So basically the pair, like I said, was to make sure that if one component is running, whatever it's paired with can't run. It locks it out. So we want to lock out the reversing with the forward and also the forward with the reversing. So once we pair the reversing here with the forward, we'll want to go back to the forward option and pair it with the reverse. So the number that you enter in here is basically whatever conveyor number it is, or however it falls in this list. So the underbin 1 conveyor is 1, 2. So the pair would be 2 for the reverse option. Oh, and we also do need to select reverse option when we do reversing conveyors. And when we select reverse option, we actually don't have to interlock it with anything because the reversing is a handoff only function. So we can go ahead and save that, and then we'll go ahead and bump back up here to conveyor 1, and we're going to pair it So we're going to pair it with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And save. Okay, so now we can do the same thing for underbin conveyor 2 reverse. We'll enable it, select reverse option. Go ahead and do the pair real quick. So we're pairing it with conveyor underbin conveyor 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be our pair. And then we'll find our inputs and outputs on the schematic. So underbin, like I said, it's going to use the same input. So 1, 2 is our input. And then our output, so we need to find the reversing, which is this here. So 5, 6. So we have 2 and 6. And then we will save that as well. So now we have all of the conveyors set up. The next thing we're going to do is set up the bins. So we'll go ahead and exit out of here. And we will come to bin editing. Okay. So here's where we're going to enable and select what conveyors are being used to get the seed from the bin to the waste system. So we have a couple different underbins, so some conveyors will need to run in certain situations and others won't. So if you scroll all the way up to the top, the first one that's selected is actually your manual hopper or your Pro Box dump. And if we look on the drawing, we do have one. And so we will go ahead and enable that here. And then under conveyors used, we're going to tell it which conveyors need to run to get the seed from that Pro Box hopper to the tri-flo. So again, we'll look at our drawing. So it looks like the transfer and scale fill need to be on. Okay, and we're using the same C number as we did when we set up the conveyors. So we know we need the scale fill, which was C1, and then we had the transfer conveyor, which we set up as C2. And we can always double check that by, we'll go ahead and hit OK and we'll save it. Exiting out, going to conveyor editing. Okay. Oh, I actually did that wrong. It was C3 is the transfer conveyor, so we'll change that. But C1 was the scale fill. So back to bin editing, conveyors used, we'll uncheck 2, check 3, hit OK, and hit save. Okay. And then we have 4 bins on the first underbin and 2 on the other. So bins 1 through 4 will have to have the underbin and scale fill selected, and bins 5 and 6 will have to have underbin 2, transition, and scale fill. So next one, bin 1, enable it, conveyors used, 1 and 2. So scale fill, underbin. And then we're going to do the same things for bins 2, 3, and 4. So enable, C1, C2, OK, and save. Okay, so now on bins 5 and 6, we will enable them, And then under conveyors used, we still need C1 because that's a scale fill conveyor. Every bin's going to need that. C2 was our underbin, C3 was our transfer, C4 would be our transition, so we will need that. And then C5 was our underbin 2, and we will need that as well. Okay, so we hit OK, and then hit save, and then we'll do the same thing for bin 6. So enable, conveyors used, C1, C4, C5. Okay, and save. Okay, so now we have all of the bins set up. So we can go ahead and exit out of there. The next thing we will be doing is I'll show you the bin site option screen. So if this site has our conveyors or our underbin conveyors, they will have encoders on them. So basically, once you have it hooked up, wired up, you can enable it, tell it what conveyor it's assigned to. So in this situation, if we were going to assign these conveyors encoders, we can go back to conveyor editing, and again it's using that C number on which conveyors. So we need C12 for the encoder 1, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for encoder 2. And 5. The alarm timer, you can adjust that if you need to. Usually we don't need to. Basically it's the amount of seconds that it has to be out of count before it will alarm out. So and then we just basically put how many normal running counts it will see. Normally these things run about 60 counts a second, so we will want to set it a little bit lower than that. So if we know it normally runs at 60, we can set these at 55. So that way if it ever falls below 55 for more than 3 seconds, then we will get an alarm for the underbin encoders. Exit out of there. The next thing we are going to do is we are going to set up our outlet paths. Basically this is it's pretty simple like this one where it doesn't have a diverter or anything like that. Then you'll just have auto treat and manual treat. If you have different outlet conveyors, so it can take different paths. You know, if they wanted one path for dumping and bagging boxes, and then another one to fill bulk trucks and stuff, but there's 2 different outlet conveyors, we can set up different paths. That way certain conveyors will run when they need to and won't when they don't need to. But like I said, for this one it's fairly simple on this. So under auto treat, we will enable it. We want the treater to run, and we have auto treater selected. Since this is a stacked system, the treater is directly underneath the tri-flo. Look back at the picture. Okay, so we can actually uncheck the inlet conveyor because we are not going to have one, because there is no conveyor feeding the treater. And then up here we do need to select the outlet conveyor. That way it does run the outlet conveyor. And then save. So I'll just kind of explain the other things that are here. If this wasn't a stacked system, we could leave this green and then select the inlet conveyor to run as well for the automated run. Pre-treater diverter would be a diverter between the weigh system and the treater. Post-treater diverter is a diverter after the treater, so we can have one of those as well, and you can kind of name it a little bit here on what position 1 and position 2 are. And then up top here we have conveyor 1, 2, and 3. This is for bin site controlled either treater inlet or treater outlet conveyors. So, like I said earlier in the video, there was that bulk seat outlet check mark if you had a outlet conveyor ran off the bin site panel, and also the conveyor inlet with procs. So this is where, if you had one of those, that you would need to put in that conveyor number here, so that way the system would know that that conveyor is a either inlet or outlet conveyor for the treater, and it needs to run in this path. And then we have the pre-treater diverter position. So 1 is going to be treat, 2 is bypass, and 0 means it's not moving. So we can have it automatically by having a number in there, and if we had a pre-treater diverter, we can actually have it automatically move the diverter to the correct position as they select the different paths. So if we had a bypass, we could actually tell it to, we could have one that says auto treat, and it would automatically put it in the treat position, and then we could have another one saying auto bypass, and it would automatically move the diverter to bypass. So that does it for that screen. Go ahead and exit out of there. Last thing we need to do is set up the pump stands. So I'll briefly touch on this because we're not actually on site, obviously, so we don't know exactly what pump stands are there. Up here there's pump stand settings, which is where this is going to be done. So up top here, set Ethernet pump IP addresses. So this is going to be used if you have a 4-pump controller, like 4-pump controller panel separate from the touchscreen that you have to run an Ethernet cable between. You would need to click here and enable pumps 1 through 4. This is also where you would need to select the 12-pump controller panel option if this is a prescriptive treating site. And basically it just sets the IP addresses so the system knows that it needs to look for this IP address for these pumps. So for this example, we'll go ahead and enable the pumps 1 through 4 Ethernet communication and then exit out. And if we remember back here on the picture, it looks like there's 3 pump stands here. It looks like there's a stainless tank and a couple poly tanks. So that's kind of what we'll use for reference on this. So we'll enable 3 pumps for the system. And since we're setting these up as Ethernet controlled, they won't have a 3-way valve, so we'll just go ahead and pull that off. We'll say that, yeah, they have SM6000s, and we'll say 2 of the pump stands have 2 pump heads with base flow, and then the third one will have 1 pump head with base flow. So that's how we'll set these up. So we used no 3-way option. These aren't loss and weight pumps. You can toggle your flow meters here depending on which one it has. We're just going to leave it as SM6000. Type in how many pump head it has on the pump, and then this also toggles between base flow, high flow, and low flow. So the accuracy tolerance, you can set that. Basically, there is an indicator on the pump block that will turn green if it's within whatever percentage you have the tolerance set to, or it'll be red if it's out of tolerance. It won't alarm anything out, but it's just kind of a visual thing for the customer. And then you can also do chemical inventory down here if you choose. Won't really mess with anything there. It's kind of up to the customer if they want to use it, but it is there for them. So now we have the first one set up. Let's go ahead and go to pump 2. Again, we're going to click used, no 3-way valve. We'll leave it as SM6000. This one will also have 2 pump heads. Leave that as base flow and hit save. And then pump 3, used, no 3-way valve, SM6000, 1 pump head, and base flow. Okay. And that is basically it. So if we exit out of here, the customer will set up their chemical, their recipes, their products, their customers. the print setup and everything like that. So now if we exit all the way back out to the main screen here, we can see that our tri-flo is showing up. We have all of our conveyors here. We can go into HOA, see them all, have our two encoders, all this good stuff. And then if we bump over to the treater side, LPX 2000, have 3 pumps that we can control. Okay, well that is how you will go about setting up a bin site on uTreat version 3.06.05. Thank you for watching.